People have been exposed to communities outside Saudi Arabia. They are, with the social media, people are seeing how communities should look like. So really, I think the name of the game now is to quickly move into full community partnership to produce full community rather than just buildings. And unfortunately, we do not have today a representative from the Ministry of Housing to discuss these issues, but I hopefully they will be exposed to the discussions we will have and hopefully go in the right direction. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nidal. Let me now move to Zuhair Hamza, CEO of Sdco Development Company, which is part of the Sdco Group. Over to you, Zuhair.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. I have done a short presentation. It's very high level, very quick, because we only have 5 minutes. So I guess it's not up to me in the 5 minutes to solve the housing problem in Saudi Arabia, but I will attempt. I always like to start with the basics. Definition of a PPP, because of the theme of this forum is the PPP. And I think if we go back to the basic and try not too much philosophy into it, but at least to remind ourselves every now and then what is the definition of the PPP. So we know it's really a cooperative effort and a venture. It always has to be between public and private sector. So that's clear. We have not invented the wheel. Built on expertise of each party. So the private sector has strength and the private sector has its strength. Once they join, hopefully a positive outcome. The objective is to meet and clearly define the public needs. So through cooperative effort, of course, and build on the allocation of resources, risk and reward for both the public and the private. So it's a simple, straightforward definition of that. Short table, just but also high level, just to see what's what and who's what. If we look at the element that are key issues in the housing sector, the public sector obviously has its own strength, and the private also have the strength. We look at it, and we look at the land cost. And we ask ourselves, is land cheap or is it expensive? Obviously, the land for the public sector has almost zero cost, if not minimal, while the private sector, of course, has to be at market cost. And so on. We move on onto the list, such as the infrastructure. Infrastructure is a basic responsibility of the government or the public sector, while private sector is not a basic responsibility, so it has to be either through a joint venture or none. Financing facility, government have access to the finance and to the money much easier than the private sector. So that gives an advantage to the government or the public. Social support, every time private sector attempt to take over a social project of a high risk like the housing, it's always there is big question marks, while the government, it can take all the regulations required, apply all the rules and regulations they can apply, and the public will perceive it in an acceptable fashion. Process and permit, private sector has to suffer in a lengthy bureaucratic process that could delay in time and cost. Profitability, the government does not seek, generally speaking, profit, while the private sector definitely work for profit. So if we match these two things, I think we come up with a formula. Now set the basics. I think I just want to give an example of the PPP that the Ministry of Housing has applied in Saudi Arabia from hands-on experience. The ministry has definitely have identified land. They did the design. They put the infrastructure. And they seek private private real estate developers to come in and build the end products. That's a kind of a PPP. The terminology and the abbreviation, ministry goes to private developer, and it has its what we call EC, or entitled people who are been pre-qualified, pre-selected by the ministry, and they have identified their needs for housing. And of course, left to the private sector or the private developer to work with all the technical aspect and the financing and so on to deliver the units, and have also worked with the individual whereby they sign an agreement to finance them and give them a loan of 500,000, and the ministry will act on the behalf of the entitled people to deal with the private sector developer. So actually the money and the payment and the finance is coming through the ministry to the developer on behalf of the individuals. I hope it's not complicated. I try to simplify it as much as I can. These are the steps that the Ministry of Housing is actually asking. You get the private sector to design within a certain parameter, and after the design, they have to market. In other words, marketing in the terms where there are pre-listed entitled people, the names and the contacts, and they also have what we call in English maybe a voucher or a coupon. That coupon says that this individual has a 500,000 Riyal loan approval from the ministry. He will go to the private developers and select the design that he sees most appropriate and sign directly with the developer. So you have a marketing process. After that, once it's sold, 50% or more of the unit allocated to the developers, the private sector can start the construction. And of course, we go into the delivery. So that's again 4 steps of how the work is done. I will try at this point just to, I have identified the basics. I have identified what the Ministry of Housing has put into the PPP with the private sector for the lands that the ministry owns, and they constructed the infrastructure. I don't have much except to say the last slide is just a wishful thinking. It's whether it could have been done or it should have been done. And what I want to suggest could have been done, or maybe it's not too late. It is a crisis, no question about it, and everybody knows. So the ministry has, as my colleague Nadal said, started on maybe a different path. While in reality, there was a real estate market was full of production, and now we see almost no production. And the reason that there were, because it's a crisis, I would have appreciate if the ministry has walked down the markets and they have identified all the vacant units and ready to be produced within the next 2 years, and have signed deals with those building owners or unit owners to have it, to secure it for the entitled people. This could have been done in a year or 2 or 3 maximum. That, in my opinion, could have yielded, at least from year 1 to year 2 or 3, almost up to 20,000 units kingdom-wide. Kingdom-wide meaning all the area of the eastern and the mid-central and the western. These units could have been available within 24 months to the ministry. It could have been, let's say, as an aspirin to the crisis that's going to find the ultimate solution. Definitely it has its own negative side effect. We're not going to discuss these, but I'm not saying this is an ideal. And if we move into stage 2, we're looking at a midterm. This is a short term, this is a midterm. I think that's what the ministry is working right now on. So it's a midterm solution that's going to take 5 to 7 years. And that's why we don't see results. With this approach, definitely could have yielded almost 50,000 units to 80,000 units, which are the land in the south, in Jeddah, in Mecca, in Dammam, and so on. So this midterm solution is what the ministry is working on. And of course, there is a long-term solution, but obviously, again, it's being worked on, maybe from day one. We're not quite exposed to that, but at least now we see it. This could have yielded a lot by saying, let's go into the master planning, master development. We go to the land, big landlords and land property, whether it's the government or the private, master plan it. look at the master development, look at the policy, facilitate the private sector difficulties and challenges. Let's work on it, which is right now we are witnessing today as we speak in the Ministry of Housing. So the efforts are being done, but it's just to point that it's a long-term effort. It's not going to be overnight. There is a midterm, which is on the process, and it's working. Short-term, that has not been done yet as of today. So in my views, the ministry started the long-term, the middle term, and have not yet reached to the short-term. While in my views, should have been maybe better have they started short, medium, and long-term. I conclude my presentation, and thank you for listening.
Thank you, Zuhair. As a moderator, I have to be a bit diplomatic, so I will call it